Hello, my name is Jason T. Ingram. My artist name is Fake Zappa. I do multimedia art and I do mental health awareness and some advocacy and some activism and stuff. Mostly it's just doing videos like this and speaking out. And sometimes my life is activism. I decided to see what would happen if I was more like out of the closet, so to speak, about being on disability and how people respond to that. And it's typically the response is sadly, the response is that I feel more vulnerable, not necessarily that folks would make an exception for me. Now, that would be nice, and it does happen sometimes in some places, but typically it means that, somebody's either scared of me or they're going to brand me as being some kind of scammer that's just collecting money from the government, that I really am higher functioning than I say that I am. And so it's been sad, but it's been empowering for me to get out there, and the people that I do business with, or the potential people that I do business with, and how they react. And I get everything from, oh, I've dealt with anxiety and depression before, and and then I just think, yeah, right. Like, how many head meds are you on? How many hospitalizations have you had? And you go over the list of folks that really suffer with debilitating disorders that basically destroys your life, and if you're not careful, destroys everything around you. And so I was talking in the last episode, and I got this camera. I mean, it's like a $1,200 camera, but I can't tell when it shuts off. I can't even tell it's running right now, so I might have to do this whole thing over again. Well, fuck you, Best Buy, for selling me something that I didn't want. We've gone over that before. But anyways, it's something that's really been on my mind a lot as I try to get out and demand equal treatment in the world of business, in this particular area, arts and entertainment, and what it's like to kind of remain in what I call obscurity, to where there's this noise of indie artists that are publishing stuff on the internet. And it used to be a big deal if you could get like an audio clip on the internet, like 15, 20 years ago. It was like, wow. There wasn't a lot out there to listen to online 20 years ago. Now, anybody that forks out $800 to buy a used MacBook can get GarageBand for free on there and put something on SoundCloud, and it's become a popularity contest more than anything. And it seems to be reserved for those who are high social functioning, high business functioning, and I can name a lot of things like that too. So oh gosh, a couple things I want to talk about when it comes to social status and pecking order, which really, really becomes more apparent the further you are down. And I was talking last time about how people that are really towards the top of the pecking order, it's traumatic for them when they're ignored, when they're treated disrespectfully by those above them, and that's all they see. And so they don't know that they're doing that to those below them, so to speak. And so I have to be aware to that. Something was on my mind the other day when there was somebody helping with some gardening, and I was like, pull that weed. And something bothered me about that. And I thought, that was a small way that I was abusing my authority. And I'm glad that I'm sensitive to that, because I wasn't sensitive to that before. When I get to a place of power, I've had a tendency to abuse it, because that's all I've known is the abuse of power. When people are over me, it's just something I've become accustomed to. They tell me what to do and I do it, because I don't want to suffer the consequences. And I just got accustomed to that mentality. And when you are in a place like that, it's just, sometimes you don't want to fight. Sometimes you just naturally give in just because you don't want to suffer the consequences. And when you're around people that are addicted to power and that are abusing authority, you have a choice to make. And I don't feel bad for making those choices, but you get to a certain age and you just can't give in to the abuse of power anymore. And I've gotten myself into some horrible, even traumatic situations being around people that are in a place of power, that are respected, that are recognized. But when it comes to a vulnerable person, in private especially, they can do whatever they want and get away with it. And they're heard, and I'm not. And so it's made me speak more about that, because I see this happening with a lot of people. That it's not just me. It's a lot of people that are considered disadvantaged, or that especially the mentally ill when it comes to this kind of stuff. Now, I want to talk a little bit about an episode of Black Mirror. And this was actually the first episode I saw of this show. It just came up on Netflix, recommended new episodes. But they started at season 3 because they assumed that everybody's seen Black Mirror before. But I hadn't even heard of it. So I was introduced to episode 1, and I believe it's season 3. But it was called Nosedive. And I just assumed that the entire series was this world where everything's pastel colors, and where everybody has a rating system and everybody has a 5-star system on who they are, not doing business or making hamburgers or a hotel. No, it's ratings for people. And I remember I thought about how funny that would be if there were ratings for people and then this show had it. And I thought, well, this is a cute show. And then as the show went on, that episode, I started thinking, oh my God, that woman in the show who's been demoted and demoted in the eyes of others because of nothing that she did. She was trying to do everything right. And social status is a privilege. It's not something that necessarily can be earned, that can be bought. It's something that either you steal it or it's given to you, or sometimes people earn it. And so I'm watching that episode, and it really didn't hit me until the very end about really how I identified with it. It was the same thing when I watched the Brian Wilson story about Love and Mercy. I'm watching this movie going, just the whole time like, holy shit, somebody, basically holding him captive, and, with a cult-like character, this Eugene Landy, who was abusing him, who was in a place of authority as a mental health provider, and was like, oh my God, that's like the story of my life, except the fact that I'm not recognized. But even though he was one of the most recognized people in rock and roll history as being the guy that wrote all those Beach Boys songs and produced Pet Sounds and all these amazing things, when he went into obscurity all those years, nobody advocated for him except for this car saleswoman. I mean, it was just an amazing story. And I think, where's my Melinda Ledbetter, if you know the story? And this Nosedive story, it also made me just weep and weep. I mean, just cry uncontrollably after I saw the movie. And then I saw that Nosedive episode around the same time when I had my big breakdown, starting in later in 2016, where it was so much betrayal that went on in my life, and it was so massive, it destroyed my career as an accompanist, pretty much, except for maybe a couple of gigs after that. And I went from being on the bottom of people's lists to not even being on their list. And so these things had some character flaws involved, and I would apologize for them. If I was being an egotist, being insensitive to people. Everything else, though, had to do with my illness. It was very illness related, manic episodes especially. And it was disgusting how the music community handled these situations. It was just amazing, the backstabbing that was going on. And it was like you can feel it when people give you a 1-star rating. And if you've seen the episode of Black Mirror, there's there's a sound effect that goes when you get a good rating, it goes you know. And so there's a scene where the protagonist is just trying to, you know, walk down a freeway exit. She's like, I didn't even do anything, and people were giving her 1-star ratings and destroying her reputation one by one, strangers doing it. And I thought, wow, isn't that like my life? And what do I do about that? How do you respond to that? She ended up in this jail for 1-star people, and here she was trying to be all nice to everybody, and her breakthrough was, you know, this guy in a fancy 3-piece suit who was across the way from her in this jail, and they seemed to have a lot of pleasure about just saying whatever the fuck was on their mind. I mean, fuck this and fuck that, and you're a piece of shit, and insulting each other. And they were really enjoying it because finally they were at the bottom. They couldn't go any lower. And I can always go lower, I think, as far as my reputation is. I'm not trying to. But yes, that episode called Nosedive was a picture of what a lot of people go through, especially the mentally ill, because there are things that we can't control, and we try our best. In fact, you've probably met a mentally ill person that's just desperate to get your approval because we've had so much disapproval. And after a while, it starts to fuck with your head to where it's like, okay, I can't make anybody happy. Why should I even try? And then that's where you get people that are committing crimes. Just because it's like, what? And so I had a thing last year where it was like, I can't get a gig even if I try. And if I do, it's not anything that I would really want to accept anyways, because it's typically just being ignored and underpaid if you get paid at all. And sometimes in the Willamette Valley, especially the Portland area, you actually have to pay money to play places because everybody wants to play. Everybody claims to be a musician and a songwriter and stuff. And there are some that are touched and talented and gifted, but there's so many of them that if you're not popular, you don't have status. You're not heard. So any opportunity I can get on a stage was like, yes. And I was like, wow. And it made some people very unhappy last summer. But there's something about, you know, your house burning down and losing your career and pretty much everything you loved, your companion pet, and, you know, wondering if I was going to recover any of my art and my projects and my digital media and all this kind of stuff. And it was just like, I just want to be on stage again, because that's where I feel like I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing in my life. I feel like it's my bliss, it's my passion. And some people belong on stage and some people take it, and they might not really have anything to contribute. And so I felt like I have something to contribute. I'm going to get on this stage, and I'm going to stay on this stage until they kick me off. And so that's another story. But I definitely made some enemies last year, and I think a lot of people didn't understand. You know, when you have a traumatic experience like that, with a mental breakdown and a midlife crisis and a whole bunch of other, you know, like this clusterfuck of, you know, crises. I finally learned how to say crises after all this time. And I don't expect people to understand it unless they've really been there. So I've had some nosedives in my life, and I've never really recovered. I was probably let's say a 4.5 star 15 years ago when I had my business, and I was, you know, mentioning that a little bit when I lived out of state. And for instance, I'd walk into a sheet music store, and they'd if there was a new employee there, I would introduce myself, and they'd be like, "Oh, you're Jason Ingram. Yeah, we have your students come in here, and we try to recommend, you know, new students to you. You're on our list, and I kind of felt like I was one of their preferred teachers because, people would go in there and say, I want a Mr. Ingram student, so I'm doing the Alfred method, and oh, we love Mr. Ingram, he's just the best piano teacher, and the kid is singing my praises, and the parents are singing my praises, and to know what that's like. And then when I came out as gay, because I was in a very conservative environment, I was working with families, then suddenly I'm not safe to be around kids, apparently. And so I also was unsafe to be in church, and I was slowly demoted from, okay, well, maybe you can help run the projector, but you can't, be on stage, or you can be on stage, but you can't lead a worship service, or maybe you can even lead a worship service, but we can't allow you to deliver a sermon. I mean, it was sort of like, okay, well, how gay are you, based on that? And, oh, you're that gay? Then we're going to have you do only this, it was disgusting to the point of I had a partner at the time, and we broke up, and then I got back together with him, and I was supposed to be best man at my friend's wedding at the time, and we had a musical group together for years, and we did a lot of really cool stuff, and so it was such an honor to be asked to be best man at this guy's wedding. And then suddenly I've got a boyfriend again, and I'm no longer best man, but I could be there at the wedding, and I could even maybe play some music. I decided, well, fuck this. I'm leaving. I got on a plane and left. I'm not going to stick around for that. I don't deserve that kind of disrespect when there's nothing wrong with being gay. There's nothing wrong with being disabled. And if I'm born with something that I can't control, then why should I be demoted, and why should I lose privileges just because of that? And so I've noticed, though, being out of the closet with my illness stuff, is that it's the same kind of bigotry, because if you've ever experienced bigotry, then you kind of know how it feels, and you kind of know what the details are, and how stuff works. When you're being excluded from things, or when you find out that things are being said behind your back, or when you get people that are saying, well, you don't have to choose to be this way, you just wave a magic wand and you can be a heterosexual, or you could be a full functioning person, and apparently you're not doing that, so there's something that's wrong with your character, apparently. And so what happens is that when people get scared of somebody, they try to attack your character. That's always the first thing, too. If they're scared of something that you're doing, then they say, well, this person is selfish, and they're dangerous, and, whatever it is that they try to get to convince themselves that they're really just afraid of somebody. And so if you ever experienced that, and here as a white male, it's funny how much bigotry I've had. It's like, how much stigma can a white boy have? And so this nosedive that I experienced in 2005 was at first kind of gradual, because slowly my clients started to back off until I was telling them, okay, I'm leaving the state. I'm selling my business, and instead of, saying, okay, well, we'll work with you until we find another teacher. No, they just quit right away, most of them, and then I didn't have any income, so I'm waiting to go into. Now, here's the thing: is that I felt like I had one choice in my life besides killing myself, was that I was not allowed because of a heavy ideology. It was a mix of like devotion and a pathological religious obsession. And I could say that it was both. That there was a lot of sincerity behind that. And I bought into a whole culture and a whole, political ideology and everything. And that was very anti-gay. So there was just no way that I could be that way. And so the only program that I found that was affordable and that was recommended to me was this straight camp in Kentucky. And that's a whole nother story. But you talk about a nosedive, though. Wow. See, when I arrived there, I was suffering from panic attacks, and I was dissociating a lot. And so basically, I was just very dysfunctional. It was like I was walking around, I couldn't hardly talk. I'd just stand there and just stare, and I would just... So I had an episode in front of all these people the first night that I was doing my orientation there, and people were yelling at me, and they were blaming me for being rude. There was a guy trying to mop the floor, and he was like an ex-gang member type guy, because they had a lot of guys that were kicked out of Teen Challenge that were too fucked up for them that ended up at this straight camp. So there were some real street type people there. And so, you know, they were doing their intimidation thing on me, triggering me, and there was no protection for me. And in fact, I got all the blame for it, because that type of abuse was coming down from the top of the organization. So it didn't matter if the students were being abusive to each other, that's what I went through for 7 months of my life. And there was another student there. He was 21, I was 31. And he had a lot of issues, and he was really getting on people's nerves, and I think he really did need a lot of mental health care. I think he was probably a little below me in the pecking order. And then they had this 19-year-old kid that came in about a month or two after I did, and he was considered kind of a space case like me, and had some social problems and stuff like that. And so basically, we were kind of the nerdy, geeky guys that were surrounded by a bunch of real street smart guys. And this particular straight camp, now mind you, Pure Life Ministries is not known for trying to reform gays, but in my opinion, having gone there, I call it a straight camp, because a lot of guys go there that were bi, that were having sex with men. I think probably the majority were. And so it was a conversion therapy inpatient program trying to practice mental health and doing a lot more harm than good. And I came out of there very traumatized, and I'm still recovering it. That's the thing that actually put me on disability, was going through that. What I'm talking about is the nosedive of what it's like to have been recognized in your gift, in your talent, your vocation, and have that at least somewhat respected, and then lose all of it. In fact, I wasn't even allowed to sing in front of anybody. They wouldn't allow me to be a part of their music or anything. And when I did my painting and my drawing, I was supposed to do it in private. So I was really, and so it's interesting that, you know, whatever's trying to fuck with my world is still trying to keep me a secret. And I've noticed this too. Now, mind you, I have this friend on Facebook. I call him my angel, and he's done a lot for me. It's just that everybody else, especially everybody in the States, when it comes to asking friends and family and colleagues and people that know my situation, they're scared to bring my life and my work to a person of influence. And they're scared because they think it'll kill me and all this kind of stuff, and they'll feel guilty if it does or whatever. And I try to explain to people that, you know, this is my reason to live. This is what I'm meant to do. And these are the things that are holding me back. And, you know, I need help. And then I try to offer people money. I try to hire folks. And I'm still hitting that same wall. And it got to the point, it was about a week ago, when my brain just said, enough. I can't do this anymore. It's kind of like if you've ever been in an abusive relationship and you're abused and abused and abused every single day, and you think, I can't leave this relationship. They have me trapped. They have me dependent on them. And then there's something in you just says, fuck it. I'm out of here. I can't handle one more minute with an abuser. And so me trying to do this thing, which is really impossible. It's like going to Vegas and, you know, trying to come out with $1 million. I mean, it's really, I'm relying on luck. If you don't have the privilege, then you're just going to go to an express elevator and push a button and hopefully it'll take you to the top. The reality, it doesn't. So right now I'm relying on faith, and I don't have a lot of faith. I think what Straight Camp and a lot of these folks did was any sincere faith that I had, they knocked it out of me. And I still have problems with the Old Testament God, and I have a lot of problems with a lot of the stuff in various religions, especially when I was a part of like hardcore Bible Christianity and the whole born again stuff, is that it really fucks with your self-esteem if you think you're nothing, and that you're only something if you have somebody else, that you're giving yourself to and giving your power to. And for some people that works. It's just that for me, after a while, that ideology was undermining my self-esteem, especially with all the other stuff all the other baggage that I had with that, like, the anti-gay stuff. And I also want to say that they were very tolerant of mentally ill people because they're strong enough to handle that. And Bible people, they take things real personally when you say anything against the Bible. But it's funny, you say something against them, they don't fall apart like a lot of educated people do. So they have a lot of strong self-esteem, and I think they could handle me. And I do mention that a lot. And so that was being at the close to the bottom of a pecking order, being around 54 men and the staff, which was another dozen or two, and being the third guy from the bottom and being treated like that for 7 months of my life after having made a career out of music. Now, mind you, I wasn't doing the fullness of my career. I'm talking, 15, 20 years ago, because I was mostly teaching, and then I tried tuning pianos, and I was doing these little restaurant gigs. I mean, I did know that it was satisfying at the time. It's just that I've always known that I have a lot more to contribute. And when I made these connections overseas a couple of years ago, it confirmed the fact that, yeah, I have this much to contribute. So what I'm trying to do is say, okay, there's a list of artists here that I respect, and they have this much exposure, and they have this much contribution. And it's fair for me to want to aim for that type of exposure for my career. And so that's basically what I'm demanding out of life. And so what I'm doing, the current depression that I'm just believing to get out of this depression. I can't afford to get into another one of these. And this one was weird. This one was, I've had this kind of depression before when you hit a wall, but this is different. This just felt like this wall was like I had gone down the list of all the things you're supposed to do as an artist to make a career out of it. And especially when it comes to hiring help. And if you're unable to hire help and you're unable to do this stuff on your own, what do? And are you willing to give up on your dream? And can you live with yourself? That's another thing too. And after doing this for about 30 years and failing and giving up and failing and giving up, and sort of being okay with that, and being okay with, okay, I'm going to do art therapy because that's what they tell me to do, and I can keep it to myself, and maybe I'll put it out there and I'll get 10 or 20 people that might respond to something I post, and can I be okay with that? And you will know if you're okay with it or not, because if you're not okay with it, you won't be able to live with yourself. You will start to self-destruct, and you'll see this in the lives. If you study the lives of a lot of artists, and if they're put in a position where they're not getting the right care, for one thing, or their business isn't getting the right support, then what happens is they will lose control. And when someone loses control, they either hurt others or they hurt themselves, or typically a little of both. for me, it's more of a self-destructive tendencies. Or in this case, like Sunday night, for instance, the most self-harm that I have done here lately is ended up with a bruised toe, which I'm counting my blessings for that, because it has been really hard to gain control. And if it wasn't for my partner, I don't know where I'd be right now, because this one was different. This one was like, wow, I've hit walls before, I've gotten frustrated, I've given up, and this one was like, I can't think of any other ways to make this work. And there's also a thing too, is that when people reach a certain age and they keep failing at something, their mind's just not going to allow them to do that. And that happens as well with some people. And I think that was one of the walls that I hit. So what I decided to do, because I mean, like every time I would call the peer-to-peer support line, or I would talk to a therapist or something, and or just friends, people I'm around, I mean, the negativity was like, bleh. And it was my reality. I mean, it was like this negativity, I could feel it. It was tangible. It was really trying to destroy me. And it's a fight every morning. I get up, and it's like I've got this blanket of doom that's over me, and I have to spend all day trying to get that energy off of me. And I'm a firm believer in a lot of kind of spooky spiritual stuff too, but I try to keep, my videos pretty neutral though. But I do believe that, well, a couple things. There's these positive confession people, and I get around them and I try to tell them my situation, and they want to be in denial of it. And their way of being in denial of it is, you got to just speak positive, and it's this hocus pocus, and it's this magic stuff, and it worked for me, it'll work for you kind of a thing. But really, there's not a lot of compassion in that. And I've noticed with tough love, is just another excuse for abuse a lot of times. And there's a lot of tough and not a lot of love when I've gotten a lot of tough love over the years. And it's typically because they won't listen to what my needs actually are and what my functioning level is. And they expect me to do things that are going to stress me out so much that they could end up harming me. And so I get a lot of bad advice. And it's always this kind of thing where I feel like I'm in this wheelchair and there's this stairway, and I thought, okay, the only way to get up this is if I drag my wheelchair and I crawl up these stairs. Meanwhile, there's all these people walking by saying, you can do it, you can do it. And I'm like, fuck you, I need some help. Can't you just take me by the hand and grab my wheelchair and get me to the top? Oh, no, we can't do that. We don't want to enable you. No. No, I'm too busy. I'm codependent and I don't like to rescue people. You get all these excuses from folks. And so here's something I've noticed is that I feel like, having, like close to 3 decades or maybe more of having access to people of influence. And I'm talking about, this started back in the late 80s when I was starting high school. And it was like, oh, there's this guy, he's really gifted and talented beyond his years, and he can do this. And then for some reason, I kind of felt like they were dangling this carrot of success, like, we could make your career, we could get you exposure, we could do this. And then, suddenly, there's the time, I gotta eat lunch, bye. Or, no, there was something going on and I decided not to. Or typically it's just poof, they disappear. Like they want to open doors for me, but when it comes down to it though, they were just trying to say nice things because people were watching. And so like I would fly to California to a big conference, and people would hear me play piano here. I was 20 years old. And we're gonna buy you a piano, and we're gonna do this for you and this for you. And then oof, they're gone. And so after several years of that, I wish that they wouldn't say anything at all. I wish they would say, hey, you're really talented, you deserve a lot more than what you have right now, but I'm not going to do anything. Bye. At least I wouldn't get my hopes up. And so I had one of those a year ago that was really bad, because I mean, these were people that I was working with that I don't know, I sort of had this feeling, because I mean, it's like I put a lot into somebody's career, and they happen to know somebody who's a person of influence, but they're kind of like, oh, Jason, okay, I'm going to do this, but you know, in order for me to open this door, I'm going to do this and this, and you're going to do this, and I'm going to control it, and then I can stop it at any time, and this kind of a thing. And so I just got mad, and I was like, are you afraid? Because one guy, he said he was afraid to open doors for me because he was scared that if I was flung out into a career like this, that it would kill me. And I mentioned that a bit ago too. And I said, well, at least he was honest about, you know, the fact that he was afraid for me. But some of these other missed opportunities, they're different things, and maybe life's telling me that I'm not ready, and maybe it's just, you know, I have to know that I want something so bad that it's going to be the death of me unless this happens. And unfortunately, there's sometimes, you know, when you're like a turtle or a beetle who's flipped over, you got to wait for somebody to put you back. And it's very easy for a person of influence to just say, oh, instead of talking about Bob this week, I'm going to talk about Jill, because she needs more help than Bob does. Bob's already got a lot of exposure, but I think I'm going to, you know, maybe shine the light on this person. It doesn't really cost them any time or money. Sometimes it does. But you look at the lives of artists, and there was always a person of influence that opened a door for them. I can't think of anybody who hasn't, although I'm sure it's happened in the past, though. And some of it has to do with who you fuck. and I've fucked some influential people that didn't even get to the point of asking me, oh, by the way, why do you know so much about art? Why do you know so much about music? Do you happen to do it, you know? And instead I just get, okay, I'm trying to date some guy who is a prominent figure, let's say like this one guy who was a famous jazz composer and arranger for one of the colleges out here. Oh, can I play your piano? He wouldn't even let me play his piano. I mean, it was like, he was telling me, no, we just want to fuck. I don't care if anybody's talented. I am not going to give you any of my influence. And I was willing to literally prostitute myself in order to do that with a, I admit it, that's how bad I want it, and that's pretty sad. But I never got my, I think it was Peggy Guggenheim that opened doors for Jackson Pollock, and of course we all know about Joan Baez and Bob Dylan. I mean, who knows what would have happened if it wasn't for, let's say, like Yoko Ono wouldn't have been a household name if it wasn't for John Lennon, and the list goes on and on with these people. I mean, they had... Something I see here is I'm dealing with two different realities. I'm dealing with the physical reality, what I feel, and also, you know, what I think and stuff like that. That's very real to me. It's incredibly negative, and it seems hopeless, really. And then I have another reality I was talking about before my camera died again, and that's what I am trying to speak out into the multiverse or whatever it is. And yeah, although there's a lot of hocus pocus with that, I think it's a universal principle. And so I'm trying to go on a fast for at least the next week or so of just speaking positive about myself, about my career, and about everything. And I should be speaking positive about my stuff. Like, I started this whole video thing today with talking about how mad I am at Best Buy for selling me a camera that I didn't want. And here it is, it's been overheating, which is weird because it's been hotter before. So I think that there is, could be an example of how when you curse something, sometimes it puts bad vibes on it. It puts bad energy. And so what happens is that I spend this time in prayer, and I've really been praying a lot lately because of just feeling so stuck. And then I I talk to people, and maybe what I'm doing is I'm just undermining all the positive things that I've spoken about myself, about my career, and about my life and what's going on. Believe me, there's a lot of other things that really seem impossible right now. And I started my last video last week saying there's a lot of good things happening. And I thought, well, that's not true because life is horrible. And then I thought about it and said, yeah, there's a lot of good things going on. I just don't see them yet. They haven't manifested yet. And so I believe that these principles, some call them the law of attraction, some call them name it and claim it, whatever it is. There could be just a spiritual thing to it. It could be science very well. And so it's something I believe I can do is to really speak positive. And so so far the symptoms that I've had, and this could be partly because I'm back on my antidepressant, which I'd been on an alternative thing for a while, for 6 weeks. And so now I'm back on more conventional stuff for the last 5 days, and maybe it's just now kicking in, I don't know. But I do feel that something is starting to change, something is lifting, and I'm really at this point now where what I was going through was dissociative symptoms, where I felt like my brain decided that this world was not a place where I wanted to live or could live, and therefore I was sort of existing and not existing at the same time. And that's a depersonalization or dissociative symptoms and things like that. And it kind of felt like I was on drugs. And some people have accused me of being on drugs when I wasn't. And then sometimes I've been on drugs and I've actually acted quite normal. And so I'm in this place where I wake up in the morning, like I said, and I have to make a choice to whether I'm going to refuse this depression, these symptoms, and this stress, and these impossible things, and I refuse to accept that I have to depend on people, especially folks that really don't know the gravity of this situation, in order to open doors for me. And I'm also believing that if they're being distracted and influenced by something, is that my gifting and calling in my life and what I have to contribute is important enough that it's going to make doors open for me. And I'm believing that. And so trying to convince myself of that and walk in that reality when I've got everything else trying to get me down, and has been such a challenge. And so anyways, that is the other reality of my life, the reality that I'm creating based on what I feel like I'm called to do in my life. And I know that there's a lot of people that if they're not doing what they're supposed to do in their life, they can't live with themselves after a while. And it gets harder and harder the older you get. And I know some people who are quite old, and they've been working at a lot longer than I don't know how they live with themselves, but it's all based on the urgency of the call and maybe the gravity of it. And if you really have something massive to contribute to the world. Now, a lot of people think they do, and they might or they might not. But the thing is that nobody will know that unless a lot of other people know that. And that's the hump that's hard to get over. And it's what they call the breakthrough. It's like when you see in movies where somebody is this unknown person, and then suddenly they have a montage where they start seeing these headlines and they start getting out into the public. And it's kind of sad that it's portrayed in movies as if, well, that's somebody's breakthrough for their career and for their life. But unfortunately, that's a reality of living in society, is that there are people demanding your attention, and more so these days. And it's such a it's an impossibility for somebody in a low place of a pecking order and a social status in order to get that kind of attention. And it really does take a some kind of intervention, and that's what I'm believing for.